Did the Jedi positively or negatively impact the Republic's chances of winning the Clone Wars? What were they really like as military commanders? We'll be discussing those questions and more on today's Star Wars video. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. We're continuing our deeper look at the Clone Wars. If you want to check out past episodes, we've covered everything from what the Clone Wars was actually like from a soldier's perspective to the brutality of the Outer Rim sieges. Now, today's video is sponsored by someone very special. That's my new Marvel Clips channel. It's called Marvel Clips. We also do things like The Boys, DC, whatever. Please suggest a new name down below. You can subscribe to that channel for news, breakdowns, lore, and more, all under a minute. I'll link to it in the upper right corner and down in the description. With that being said, let's talk about Jedi Generals. And the starting point for this is an excellent chapter introduction from The Essential Guide to Warfare. As always, that book does a phenomenal job of synthesizing information and making it easy to understand. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit of history. If you think that the Clone Wars were the first time the Jedi served the Republic, that couldn't be further from the case. It was, to be fair, the first time the Jedi had fought in true warfare for 1,000 years, but the Ruusan Reformations were the end of what had been essentially a Jedi versus Sith war. The interesting thing about that conflict, which was called the New Sith Wars, was that it was ostensibly a battle of good versus evil, another case where the Jedi were in full open warfare against the Sith and the Sith Empire. In that case, the Republic took an active role, as did the Sith Empire, but as we see in the Bane trilogy, most of the actual action was orchestrated by the Jedi and the Sith themselves, and they were operating at an extremely high level. If you go back to the earlier days of the Jedi and the Sith, that was pretty much the case as well. The Republic sort of built up around the Jedi, and the Jedi supported the Republic and vice versa. But in the Tales of the Jedi comic, for example, you'll see that the Jedi essentially have not only their knights, but also a full fleet at their control. The degree to which the Jedi were fully integrated or not with the Republic waxed and waned, but generally, as the Essential Guide to Warfare states, beginning with their role as defenders against threats beyond the galactic frontier, the Jedi sought to protect civilization, and for all its imperfections, the Republic stood for millennia as the highest embodiment of civilization. It continues stating that while the Jedi generally feared and had major reservations about leading because of the corrupting effect of power, they did on many occasions step in to intervene with the ruling and affairs of the Republic. Aside from the two examples I gave earlier, where the Jedi were essentially fighting alongside the Republic, the Essential Guide to Warfare also points out crusades against the Taiwanese and the overthrowing of the Pius Dea, both cases where the Jedi actually stepped in to stop the Republic from doing something which could turn them fundamentally evil. It almost makes me wonder whether the Jedi should have seen the circumstances around the Clone Wars and maybe stopped in to prevent the Republic from entering the war itself. I mean, the Separatists really just wanted to leave the Republic. I've covered this in a prior video, why there may have been legal or policy reasons not to allow this and how it ultimately could have affected the Republic as a whole, but still, was fighting an entire war because certain systems wanted rights of self-determination really worth it? I don't know. I'll come back to that and talk about the Clone Wars in just a second, but before I do, I want to briefly take a slightly closer look at the Pius Dea Crusades. There's actually a full video covering that event on the channel, but basically, about 12,000 years before the movies, a man named Contispex was elected as Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. He used this position to launch the Pius Dea Crusades, which were essentially xenophobic wars against alien races. The Supreme Chancellor and his successors would not only kill many aliens, but would also alienate the galaxy. Eventually, the Jedi Order, alongside those within the Republic, actually launched a coup, and Jedi Grand Master Biel Ductavis was made the next Chancellor. Jedi would serve as Chancellors intermittently throughout the rest of galactic history. However, by the time of the New Sith Wars, like we mentioned earlier, Jedi were continually being elected as Chancellors, reflecting their increased role in leading the Republic and its military. So after the New Sith Wars in 1000 BBY, the Ruusan Reformations were created, which severely changed the distribution of power in the galaxy. The Republic, which had created a powerful centralized navy to fight off the Sith, essentially disarmed itself and gave power instead to local systems who were meant to provide their own fleets and armies. This of course leads to the Clone Wars, where the Republic is woefully unprepared to fight the Separatists. This worked out very, very well for Palpatine because it got Jedi directly involved with the line of duty. There was no one to lead the new clone army. The Republic judicial forces did exist, but according to the Essential Guide to Warfare, they were ill-prepared for leading during the Clone Wars. The Jedi reluctantly agreed to lead at Geonosis, hoping to cut the Separatist head off in one fell swoop. Obviously, that was not successful. Dooku survived, as did most of the CIS leadership, so the Jedi were appointed officers of the Grand Army of the Republic. Returning to the Essential Guide to Warfare, it says, while the Jedi were officially part of the military hierarchy, their responsibilities and commands were fluid, with Jedi Knights such as Anakin and Obi-Wan leading troops into ground combat one day, commanding a naval task force the next, and accompanying commandos on a secret mission the day after that. Knights and Masters were given the rank of General, while lesser Jedi were typically commanders or just didn't serve. We could probably talk about how this may not have been the best use of the Jedi, and it's certainly not what we see later on in Star Wars Legends. I think the Jedi definitely did have a lot to offer when it comes to warfare. Obviously on the battlefield, they're very skilled, but even from a grand strategic point of view, the Jedi's skills through the Force are not to be ignored. Still, were the Jedi really better than clones who had trained and studied battle their entire lives when it came to, say, the day-to-day management of the Republic's war effort? I think the Battle of Geonosis is an example of the Jedi not really knowing what they're doing. The Republic had full space superiority at Geonosis, and they allowed the Separatist fleet to escape. We also see, for example, how Ahsoka Tano, earlier on in her career, essentially sacrificed the lives of clone troopers because she had, to be honest, absolutely no clue what she was doing. But her command was built into how the Republic was organized. And that's what Palpatine wanted. He didn't need the Republic to win the war conventionally. He wanted Jedi to become corrupt. He wanted Jedi to be seen fighting a war by the public. And of course, he wanted Jedi very close to the ready blasters of clone troopers. I also do wonder whether the Jedi's ethics would have limited the options available to the Republic. We don't see, for example, orbital strikes very frequently during the Clone Wars. Maybe that's why. It's interesting to compare how the Jedi operated during this war to how they served during the Yuuzhan Vong War. At that point, Luke's new Jedi Order was having a bit of a crisis of faith. Some thought that the Jedi should intervene directly against the Yuuzhan Vong, perhaps even take orders from the Republic, while others, like Luke, thought that the Jedi should have a more defensive role and should simply respond to the Vong when they made incursions. It's interesting that Luke actually thought about the proper service of the Jedi, especially when considering how war can lead people to the dark side, while Yoda, on the other hand, recognized that the Clone Wars could be an issue, but ultimately did nothing. The discussion of how the Jedi should work in concert with the Republic is explored later on in Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi, with Luke ultimately deciding that the Republic and the Jedi had gotten too close, and to that effect, he actually takes the Jedi Temple off Coruscant to make that separation. But guys, that's a brief description of how the Jedi operated, some of their weaknesses, and their history of warfare and leadership in the Republic. Do you have any questions or something you'd like to see me explore more? Let me know all of that down below.